In an age when writers almost seem to outnumber readers, it's worth reflecting on what motivates us to do any writing at all. If our purpose is to be noticed, then most of our work is destined to undergo some rite of passage. Often that involves some loss of control. For example, from reviewers correctly or incorrectly evaluating what we've done and or making changes that might or might not be desirable, may or may not be accurate, may or may not be reversible, and may or may not be revealed to the author before publication. Sometimes they appear in the final printed version as an unwelcome surprise. Even when that worst of all worlds surprise doesn't happen, review by professional writers can be a grueling exercise. The reviewers may know their grammar. That usually isn't the problem. But they seldom know the terms and conventions accepted by the document's intended audience. Invariably, they presume to rephrase what the author carefully prepared, routinely changing something right into something at best awkward or at worst wrong. If uncorrected, the damage can be critical, making the author look naive or hopelessly incompetent. If, in addition, the renovator is obstinate, watch out. Do everything possible to minimize damage. You don't want to come out looking like a monkey. Even when that worst case doesn't happen, the burden can be heavy, forcing the author to spend dozens of hours making corrections to the corrections. I can't offer a solution. This is just an alert. Authors are up against a scourge of unsound revisions that became institutionalized a long time ago. For some, there are alternatives. Rather than risk interference, we can proceed on our own, without depending on marketing from a publisher. That's especially easy for blogs or other documents on the internet. Also, for books, we can go it alone, ordering and reordering as many or as few as we want, whenever we want. Which way is best depends on circumstances. I've had books printed both with and without being under control of a publisher. Resisting a publisher's control for my second book is worth narrating here. There were several reasons, but the main ones were centered around that word control. Book publishers still act as if all of us were still in the old days when they did all the preparation and typesetting. The author would receive only a small % royalty. The publisher would set the schedule, and an author who couldn't deliver on time was late. Every late month would reduce the royalty by some amount. One day over a month would count as another month. And for the grand finale, the publisher reserves the right to make alterations, and the cost of alterations is to be subtracted from the royalties. Evidently, P.T. Barnum is still alive. I instantly rejected those terms. The publisher retracted them and offered an advance, but it was too late. It's important to have faith in the ones who will handle your work. Once an author is beyond that set of decisions, with final draft presented to the world, another complication may be brewing: content theft. Not limited to plagiarism, has various forms in this age of the internet. Your work might appear elsewhere with or without your name mentioned, maybe in altered form, maybe also with some mistakes added, presented as part of a high or low quality work attached to another owner. As another possibility, it may be evaluated by that new owner or anyone else unqualified to judge it, or by one with an agenda, or by one desiring recognition. Sometimes those exploits appear in combination. A pretender might copy your work and just add simple changes, with or without mistakes, to justify claiming it. Or he may criticize your work even as he copies it with minor revision. Career evaluations often count how many publications, irrespective of their validity. Pressure to publish can lead some to submit material that's copied, incomplete, or superficial. These rip-offs can happen in a lot of different ways, but unfortunately, I'll have to leave solutions for others to figure out. Better heads than mine have tried to define strategies to overcome stealth versions of theft. Right now, I'll turn to another big subject, copyright violation. Here we've come to the chain of events that prompted me to produce this video. In the early 1970s, I was fortunate to have two highly qualified aerospace experts review my book, Integrated Aircraft Navigation, for academic press. The first of 5 hardcover printings appeared in 1976. The book brought together a range of topics that were considered very advanced at the time. Primarily, those included inertial navigation and modern estimation in both recursive form, Kalman filtering, and block form, weighted least squares. But several more topics were addressed in addition. For example, subtle properties of rotational motion, vibrations, resulting effects on strap-down accelerometers and gyros, common radio nav aids, various modes of radar, plus others. After 5 hardcover printings, here it is in paperback form. Developments in many of the main areas were embryonic in the 1970s. Journal and conference papers of that era generally addressed only one of the nascent topics, or occasionally 2. Quite often the literature was a major challenge to follow for most readers who weren't specialists. Papers describing Kalman filtering, for example, often contained derivations or explanations using math at higher levels than necessary. Another impediment to learning was presence of material having secondary importance. A number of books describing inertial navigation devoted much length to Laplace transforms or non-essential details of sensor mechanization and physics, for example, equivalence principles. Much of what was available seemed to be written for experts only. Integrated aircraft navigation, then, had multiple purposes. Diverse topics were brought together under one cover, with unified perspective and consistent notation, presented in ways that enabled understanding. From my struggle with the literature of the 1960s to acquire that understanding, I knew the difficulties facing those trying to learn this. That placed me in a unique position to put the ingredients together. Well, the effort paid off. People have told me that was how they learned rotational dynamics in various forms, quaternions, inertial navigation, Kalman filtering, synthetic aperture radar motion compensation, or other topics covered in that first book. Although decades of technological advances replaced mechanization methods of that era, the analytical principles remain valid. The book is still useful for short courses I've taught since the 1980s, continuing to the present day. There have been many quotable quote testimonials from those courses on my website and from book sales. Just one problem. Someone or someones might violate your copyright. The original publisher, Academic Press, later acquired by Harcourt, Brace, and World, gave me exclusive copyright after those 5 hardcover printings. Here's the letter showing that. Despite that, note this offer transformed from hardcover to another form. Okay, theoretically, Amazon provides a way to respond. But how can this say I'm not signed in? The red arrow points to Hello, James. So, like their trained seal, I did a sign-in and filled in another form. But someone wanted more things filled out. So, I identified myself as author of a different book that Amazon sells, In addition to what's shown here, I noted their mistake listing James L. Farrell Jr. My son wasn't born yet in 1976. And I noted my ownership of the copyright, which prompted this September 1, 2019 assurance that rights are respected. Oh, sure. But somehow they didn't recognize my copyright ownership. So, all right, with growing impatience, I told them who I am again and provided more information. Someone who didn't like that cut me off. Okay, here's my proof. For example, this type of communication from Amazon to a vendor is commonplace. Good thing I never needed to use their feedback before. And so, back to square one? No, I'm convinced that's futile. So it's documented, this time with a lot of impatience. And so are these certified mail receipts. Here's the outcome of all this. Confronted with criminal methods involved, Amazon would likely offer this explanation. Being only a platform, Amazon is not responsible for what appears for sale on their site. That may stand in a court of law, but it has the effect of shielding the guilty. Should a broader set of considerations be raised? Shouldn't corporations controlling multi-billion-dollar fortunes consider the consequences of how they're being used? Or should they remain blissfully inattentive? That word inattentive isn't exaggerated after the narrative just presented and summarized now. In the process of filling out a form on Amazon's site, I'm informed that I'm not logged in, though the top line of the form saying I'm not logged in also has the same greeting that appears when I make a purchase. Okay. Anyway, I repeated the procedure and, like their trained seal, resubmitted it. That time an answer came back. Do it again, with more information. That was done again, with the required repeat of the same information, plus their verification code, plus their bulleted items, noting that there's no difference between the rights owner and myself. Response again claimed that Amazon cannot recognize who sent all this. In addition, there are blunders. For example, there was and is only one author. My son was born after that book was published, and his name isn't James Jr. I included items under additional information, referring to a different hardcover book I wrote in 2007 that Amazon sells, giving a crystal clear way to recognize me. My intended reaction was a letter that angrily recalls meeting all demands for information but getting no response. Icing on the cake, trying to send even that complaint to Amazon failed. Communication closed. Their quote, "Messages sent to that email address will not be reviewed." All patience evaporated then. That was the last straw. Time to make this video. We often hear that criminals owe a debt to society. Are their enablers, in this case platforms, likewise indebted? Yes, there are others as bad, even worse. The link shown here asks the question, is Scribd.com a virtual haven for copyright infringement? Beyond that, you can find various others. God only knows what you'll risk by going there. Another publisher claiming highest and most honorable standards is one which in 2000 bought Harcourse Brason World, which acquired Academic Press in 1969. Just by its mention here, you can guess what happened there. Yep, they also sold my book. At least in that case, they wrote a check to me making up for it. So, all right, they're forgiven. I'm not out to get anyone burned at the stake. Again, these stories aren't unprecedented. The internet offers many others. The intent of this video is to acknowledge injustices endured by many experienced authors and alert new aspiring authors to some spiders in the woodpile out there. Apologies for not presenting a solution. There is none at this time. In our world loaded with internet crime these days, this is just one example and nowhere near the largest. Still, it's always worth the effort to right a wrong.